We are joined by Christopher Bollyn, author of the book Solving 9/11, who is fresh off of a tour here in Florida, giving lectures in various locations about the largest event in my lifetime, probably in yours as well, that has shaped geopolitics in so many different ways. It's such a pivotal part of the deception of the power structure in place in our world today. And Christopher Bollyn has been at the forefront of this issue for many years now. Chris, good to meet you, man.
Nice to meet you, Bob.
So tell the listeners, all right, and the viewers in this case, I'm in radio mode still. 9/11, we all know by now, or you ought to know, and many of the people who are watching this are the choir, right? So one of the things that I worry about is this preaching to the choir, constantly reiterating what we already know about such a pivotal part, as I just mentioned, of our history. What can we do now, 15 years later, to go beyond the choir, to reiterate the importance of exposing 9/11 for what it really was, and to not continue to be fractured in so many different areas? You know, how do we come out with some sense of direction here when we all know that 9/11 was lied about by the powers that shouldn't be, and we all know that these buildings came down in a fashion other than what we were told?
Yeah. Well, the most important thing is to understand that as you said, for 15 years almost, we've had a deception given to us, a false narrative given to us by the government and the media. Neither the government nor the media have ever addressed any of the unanswered questions about 9/11. And of course, as you know, because the government considered the attacks of 9/11 as an act of war, they avoided investigating it as a crime. But what that tells us is that our government and our media are basically controlled by the same people who carried out 9/11. That gives the listeners, the readers, the viewers an idea of how serious our political predicament is in this country. Because the crime happened, 14 and a half years ago, but the cover-up and the promotion of the deception have been ongoing ever since. And that's a very important part of my book. I show the people, I name the people who are behind the cover-up and the deception of 9/11. And you know, we live in a nation today that is very, very woefully deceived. We're deceived on every level. Now, if these guys lied about 9/11 and the war on terror is, of course, a fraud, as it's based on the hoax of 9/11. But that means that we can be pretty sure that most of these terrorist attacks that happen here and abroad are also orchestrated by the same people.
What's to come in the false flag narrative? We've seen things happening in France now. Most recently, we've seen attacks here on United States soil. What's the next big picture false flag on the horizon? Everybody wants to know. Everybody is waiting for it. What do you see?
Well, I don't know what they're going to do. I mean, I certainly don't know that, but you can see where they're going. These false flag terror attacks are meant to factionalize the population. Domestically, they do things to separate or to draw division between white and black, Hispanic and Anglo and all of this. So they're trying to factionalize our society in the same way they did in Iraq.
Divide and conquer.
Exactly. And in the global agenda, they're anti-Islamic. So all of these incidents and things that they're doing, even the migration of refugees into Europe today, this is all being done to foment hostility in the West against Islam and Muslims.
Why? What benefits are the powers that shouldn't be in promoting anti-Islamic rhetoric?
Well, that is the new Cold War. The Cold War ended, and they replaced it with this war, which is basically driving the West against Islam. And they have a goal, in the Middle East to break up the countries like Iraq and Syria and Libya into ethnic statelets, which they've succeeded in doing in all those countries.
Right.
And as they did in Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was the test model. And they succeeded there. and they reduced a large military and socialist nation into ethnic statelets that are poor and weak.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they want to do in the Middle East. That's the Yinon plan that Israel has to dominate the region by breaking up the big statelets militarily and then into ethnic statelets.
How important is it to understand the role of Israel in this geopolitical big picture?
Well, Israel is important to understand because Israel is basically the operational arm, the fist, if you will, of the Rothschild bankster family and other the Zionist establishment.
So when we see on 9/11 that the Mossad was caught on the George Washington Bridge, for instance, with explosives in their van, doing surveillance and so on and so forth, we see the claws of the operative hand, if you will, of Israel.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And as my book shows, in the ideation of the crime, that went on for decades prior to 9/11, the setting up of the crime, the carrying out, and then the cover-up and promotion of the false narrative. This was basically a Zionist project. When we say Zionist, we of course we mean the state of Israel because we're talking about Jewish nationalism.
Right.
But we're also talking about a very small subset of people. We're talking about the Likud coalition, the Likud party, which Netanyahu has been the chairman of since 1993. We're talking about the most extreme right-wing element of Israeli Zionism, the Likud. It was created by Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir, bona fide de facto terrorists. And when these terrorists came to power in the 70s in Israel, I was there when they came to power.
You were in Israel?
Yes, I was. And my girlfriend at the time, she was a labor kibbutznik, they cried. She cried and said that this is the end of Israel because this is the day that the terrorists have taken power. And as we saw, the very next year when Begin came to power, in 1978, he began putting into effect the invasion of Lebanon, in which they wanted to partition that state.
Do you know Barry Shamash, by chance?
I know him. I haven't met him on this trip, but I know
Well,
him.
he talks about the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin,
Yes.
and he talks a lot about what you're saying here in this changing of the guards, if you will,
Yes.
on some of the influencers in Israeli politics.
Yes.
Have no doubt, folks, that there is a shadow government even beyond the government we see at Israel at hand here. And it was funny, we were talking about this. I flipped through the book just to glance down at it, and the page I went to was on the IDF. Of course, it stands for the Israeli Defense Force, but you wonder, and you ask the question, perhaps it stands for the Israeli Drug Force. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I think that's in chapter 2 about the planes of 9/11.
Right.
And we're talking about these Israeli companies that were refitting planes and converting planes. And this company that you're reading about there, they had one of their facilities in Bogota, Colombia. And
Home of the drug cocaine.
Yes,
So I hear.
Yes, and my experience with Israelis in this part of the nation and the Caribbean is that they have often been involved in drug smuggling, and this is, as I point out in that article or in that chapter, is that I think this is actually the common denominator where the Bush family, the Clinton family, and the Israelis come together, because there's a saying that nothing binds people more closely together than a crime committed together.
Well, we know the Bush family has been involved in the heroin trade. He got the nickname Poppy Seed Bush for a reason.
Right.
We know that the drugs being smuggled from South America, Venezuela, from the FARC and Colombia are now going into Africa and fueling some of these.
And Mena, Arkansas.
Right. I've heard that the Clintons might know something about that.
And the Philip Marshall, the journalist, the author who was found dead, had been the personal pilot for Barry Seal, who fits exactly into that whole chapter there. I write about Barry Seal because Philip Marshall had been the personal pilot for Barry Seal. He knew a lot about this operation, the Mena operation. So with him, it went beyond the rumor. It became facts that he knew. And I read his books, and I think that's why he was killed. It's because he knows too much about the drug smuggling.
It's a pivotal part of the power structure of the Black Ops, if you will. We can look at the Iran-Contra scandal and some of the United States factions that have been behind both sides of the so-called war on drugs. And it is, of course, no surprise to many people watching this right now that it's a part of the false flag dialectic, if you will. It's a part of the fear of terrorism, the fear of drugs, and meanwhile, we see that certain interests are playing both sides of the coin.
Right.
Chris, what do you say as far as solutions are concerned? Let's talk solutions.
Yeah.
You know, everybody, wants to get the info out, but at this point, we're beating a dead horse. I just wonder sometimes, how do we really combat this? We know that politicians aren't going to save us because the elections more often than not are rigged, in my opinion, and it just seems like a lost cause there. What do we do?
Yeah, well, the first thing we have to do is we have to, obviously we have to become aware. Your readers and your listeners are aware, but we have to spread that awareness, and we have to form groups or organizations at a local level that are interested in the truth and taking action.
Right.
Like, for example, here in Florida, my last 3 events were all sponsored by We Are Change Orlando.
Okay, know those
and
guys.
Veterans for Peace Central Florida chapter, Bob Bowman Memorial chapter.
The rogue chapter of Veterans for
Right.
Peace, and Phil Restino, who was
Soon
helpful.
to merge with We Are Change Orlando.
Oh, that's good news.
Yeah.
But the whole idea is that the anti-war movement has not been quick to embrace the 9/11 movement, which seems counterintuitive because if you understand 9/11, you understand the reasons for these wars.
Right, but Bob, the thing you have to understand is that the 9/11 Truth Movement and the anti-war movement, they're both infiltrated.
Sure.
And in many places, they're infiltrated with gatekeepers who actually become the managers or the directors of the local chapter. And so they make sure that people like me are not invited to that town, Denver, Phoenix. These are towns that are closed to me because the 9/11 Truth Movement in those towns are controlled. And this happens in a lot of places.
Or they're influenced. I don't
influenced.
necessarily believe that some of these lower level, organizers are in on it per se, but they're influenced from the likes of Noam Chomsky and others, sort of intellectuals that make them have this sensing of, this feeling of, well, let's not go there because that's beyond the line, the Noam Chomsky line,
yeah.
if you will.
Well, no, but it does happen. Like in one big Midwestern city, the man who runs is the big steering committee of the 9/11 group in that town. His brother was one of the directors of MITRE, Lincoln Labs at MIT, which is tied into the 9/11 thing through the P-TECH and MITRE Corporation being in the basement of the FAA. And working with this a computer response to a crisis and how FAA would communicate with the military, and then his nephew was lead head technologist for Hewlett Packard in Israel, and so because my research identifies some of the key Israeli and Zionist players, a person who has a strong connection to the state of Israel is going to be reluctant to hear what I have to say.
Well, they shouldn't, because at
Right.
the end of the day, just like the American people should stand up against the lies of their government, the Israeli people should as well. And that's not to say that I believe that the state of Israel is a legitimate state. It's a criminal state. I don't believe that from the get-go it should have been put in that geographic location that it was put in, and that the Rothschild family should have had the same influence in that part of the world. They looked at other locations at one point in South America. And Chris, I don't know if you know this, but I happen to come from a Jewish family.
Okay.
So I have the background of coming from this
Right.
culture, if you will.
Sure.
I'm secular. I could care less about all of that. I don't practice the religion. I consider myself coming from a Jewish family, but not Jewish. But that being said, Israel promotes anti-Semitism. The state and the actions of this criminal state promote hatred to people who are not privy to the hierarchy of this black ops, if you will. There's no way anybody watching this right now can say that somehow Chris and I are being anti-Semitic because we're exposing the evils that the state and the different compartmentalized efforts within the state of Israel have created.
Well, Bob, prior to like 1948, the majority of Jews in the United States were anti-Zionist.
Right.
But the thing is that I think the author is Alan Hart. He's written a trilogy of books, but it's very important to understand that the state of Israel, as it behaves, as it's currently constructed, is the biggest danger to the Jewish people in the world today. Avi Shlaim wrote the same thing, an Israeli journalist years ago. It was published in the International Herald Tribune in Europe, but it was not printed in the mothership, the New York Times, in this country, because the editors at the New York Times, being a B'nai B'rith newspaper,
Sure.
did not want the American Jews to read this Israeli criticism in which Avi Shlaim said that the greatest danger to Jewish people in the world today is the state of Israel, and its misbehavior, its malfeasance, its criminality, and that's the same thing with 9/11. You know, I only put the blame on the people who are actually involved. It's not an ethnic, it's not a religious thing, it's a criminal matter.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who carried out 9/11 are criminals, and
Right.
they need to be revealed, exposed, and prosecuted. That's essential.
A criminal is a criminal is a criminal, no matter if
Right.
they're a Martian criminal,
Right.
you name it, they're still a criminal.
Right.
And we should expose who those criminals are, what ties they have, what allegiance they have, and so on and so forth.
Well, it's essential for 9/11 because 9/11 remains an unsolved crime. As I explained, it was never investigated as a crime, and they just turned over all the mess, the pile of rubble, turned it over to the city of New York, and recycled it. But that was
To China.
Yeah, but that was a crime scene where 2,700 people were killed, many of whom had gone through a process of literally being cooked alive. Those who jumped because it was so incredibly hot in those towers that they chose to end their lives. But the thing is that we cannot allow Americans of every stripe, of every ethnicity, we cannot allow this crime to go on uninvestigated and unprosecuted. Because if we do, if we allow the false narrative to dominate,
Mhm.
then we are then beholden to, we are enslaved to the conclusions of that false narrative,
Right.
which is an agenda of war.
Folks, Christopher Bollyn's new book, Solving 9/11, tackles all of these topics and so much more. Real quick before we end it, you know what Rudolph Giuliani said when I asked him why he shipped out all the debris and told people the air was safe to breathe?
What
Told me to go take a shower.
he did.
Yeah, this guy has the chutzpah to tell me to go take a shower when he is the slimiest, scummiest mofo who definitely was at least privy to some of what happened,
Yeah.
hence why he didn't show up to his bunker in Building 7. So Rudolph Giuliani, if you're watching this right now, I love you, baby. Come back and see me sometime. He ran for me, dude. Like,
Yeah.
he was... I'll show you the video in just a little bit. Anyways, Christopher Bollyn, ladies and gentlemen. Check out the book, Solving 9/11. He's actually getting out there, telling people what's going on, standing up for what's right on such an important topic. Even 15 years later, folks, we still cannot let go of this canary in the coal mine. Chris?
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Yep.